Science Theater 3000 debuted on local Minnesota station KTMA in 1988, the same year I was born.
And although it's become an enduring icon of nerd culture, it's kind of hard to introduce to new viewers. At face value, the show was always about one thing, making fun of bad movies. But it had a story of its own to support that idea. An everyman is shot into space by mad scientists who force him to watch terrible movies in an attempt to break his mind. His only defense against such torture is to riff on the bad movies with the robotic companions he builds. The show was created by Wisconsin native Joel Hodgson, who basically plays himself, albeit under a different name. While the show was always first and foremost a vehicle for mocking terrible cinema, the characters took on a life of their own and forged incredibly strong relationships that resonated deeply with the fans. Joel, Crow, Servo, Mike, and even the Mads weren't just mouthpieces for delivering smackdowns on bad movies. They felt like real people who related in real ways, even if all they were doing was being incredibly silly.
Still, this can be a bit of a difficult show to introduce someone to. First, you need to find someone who can appreciate the deadpan snark and often caustic wit of the riffers. Secondly, you need to find someone who's open to the idea of tearing down bad films, but still entirely willing to let the absurdity of the premise and the whole segments just sort of wash over them. Third, and probably most importantly, you need to choose an introductory episode wisely.
With 197 episodes and one theatrical release, there is a wealth of schlock for you to choose from. But tread lightly. You want to be sure that your pick won't put off your new viewer.
But now's the time to bring in new fans. Mystery Science Theater 3000 is celebrating its 25th anniversary with this beautiful limited edition collector's tin that features 6 episodes, including 2 of my absolute favorites. So in honor of this awesome show and all the laughs and the surprising amount of feels it has given me, I'll be taking a look at which episodes are the best with which to introduce someone new to MST. And then I'll take a look at some episodes you should probably avoid for such a task. Also, I should mention this is the kickoff to what I'm calling a month of Mystery Science Theater. So there will be spoilers ahead. If you see that I'm about to talk about an episode you haven't seen yet and you want to skip ahead, feel free to do so. I'll include timestamps in the description. And without further ado, let's begin!
This is the song written for the train.
The number one best episode to introduce new fans to MST3K is...
He tried to kill me with a forklift. Lame!
Da 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 da. Lame. Bum bum. Lame bum.
Space Mutiny hits that sweet spot of being incredibly bad without being unwatchable, filled with 80s cheese but not boring or objectionable. The jokes come hard and fast, and there aren't too many obscure references that might turn off a new viewer. The host segments are almost entirely related directly to the movie itself, easing new viewers into how the sketches work. To top it all off, Space Mutiny features one of the most famous running jokes from the show.
Fridge, large meat.
Punt, speed chunk.
Butch, deadlift.
Browsdower.
Number 2.
Listen. You guys better stop it or I'm going to give you both a timeout, okay? How's that make you feel?
Joel, you said we could stay up for the movie.
Yeah, that's what we're designed for.
Yeah.
If you know someone who would get just as much enjoyment out of the host skits as the riff itself, this would be a great introduction to the entire show. It sets up perfectly the point of the show, the relationship between Joel and the bots, and the way the invention exchanges work. The host segments are silly as ever, but also firmly grounded in the film itself. Speaking of the film itself, it also strikes a pretty nice balance between being incredibly bad without being unwatchable. Well, at least the edited version is not unwatchable.
For those of you playing along at home, Rita is dead.
Hi, Kiva! Hi!
Number 3.
You know, I could watch that all day.
Merlin sends in his trained flatulence to scout the room.
I'm probably biased towards this one because it was the first episode I ever saw. It was recommended to me by a dear friend, and it was a great introduction to the show. There's never a dull moment, but unlike the safe camp of Space Mutiny, Merlin's shop has plenty to object to. including murder, animal abuse, and demonic possession. What makes it all worse is that the directors apparently thought this was perfectly acceptable fodder for a children's bedtime story. Such a devil-may-care attitude towards such disturbing topics makes this movie an easy target for Mike and the bots, and I loved watching them tear it down. I was laughing the whole time, and by the end was hooked on the whole concept. However, I realized the incredibly dark material may be too much for some people, even with the jokes to ease the pain. Know your audience and decide for yourself whether this would be a good first episode to start them with.
Then the cat's flesh was roasted.
Grandpa, no.
Sit down, you're gonna listen. His flesh melted and his horrible screams.
Number 4.
Puma Man.
But your experiment this week, Joel, is called Pod People. It has nothing to do with pods. It has nothing to do with people. It has everything to do with herding.
This turkey is part E.T., part The Rescuers Down Under, and part That Thing You Do. If you're wondering how those three things go together, the short answer is, they don't.
Meanwhile, in still yet another movie.
This is a solid riff, one of the funniest I've seen. And most of the host segments are pretty straightforward. Most of them. The Mondegreen Fest Idiot Control Now is a fun time all around, and the Mads public domain karaoke machine is comedy gold. But Joel's host segments tend to be a bit more obtuse than Mike's. The trippy Trumpies magic scene is still directly related to the film in question, and it does make sense in context, for the most part. But I can't stress this enough, the host segments are not for everyone, and Clown in the Sky is a prime example of that. If you like this kind of bizarre, offbeat humor, you'll love this episode. If not, stick to Space Mutiny.
Uncle Bill?
Jody?
Buffy?
Mr. French?
Mrs. Beasley?
Chief?
McCloud?
He left the road right here.
Number 5.
Watch out for snakes.
Who said that?
Here's the wind-up and the pitch.
Werewolf? No, werewolf. Where? Say it.
Another good riff to an awful movie. But what makes it special is a beautifully simple series of host segments whereupon Mike slowly turns into a were-crow. I always love when they mix things up a bit, and this episode has Mike tripping over Crow as they leave the theater. Mike cuts himself on Crow's net, transferring some of Crow's essence into himself. And before you roll your eyes at that, that is a very direct jab at what actually happens in the movie. That is how people become werewolves in Werewolf, by cutting themselves on the skeleton of a wolfman. And Mike turning into Crow is a sight to behold. Silly? Of course. Obvious? Perhaps. But magnificent all the same.
Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me, 'cause I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee.
Your mileage may vary, of course, but these are easy episodes for newcomers to follow that will make a good impression of the show and hopefully leave them wanting more. Click here for part 2, where I'll talk about a few episodes that are a tad more inaccessible to new viewers.